Banditos, welcome to a brand new episode for a brand new week of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Warren Phillips.
And as always, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop and talk to your favorite comic book artists and writers of yesteryear. And today, we're bringing you our interview with none other than Jill Thompson. Fantastic and seriously very interesting interview for a very interesting person. She has a really interesting career, as everything we do is interesting. But in all seriousness, it is. She's done quite a number of different things. She's written children's books. She's written comic books, illustrated comic books. You may know her from her work on Wonder Woman. She had a very long run on that, as well as a run on Sandman, all of which are great. And something that Oren and I are quite fond of. Oren?
She also, as I listened to this interview, worked with the WWE designing ring gear and designed the ring gear for Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, which kind of blows my mind because I just knew her from comics. I really loved her run on Wonder Woman, but now she's just probably maybe the coolest person who walks the earth because she just does everything that's awesome. So I'm really excited to hear this one.
Yeah, it was a great interview, and look, I'll be honest, I think we bored Mike with a little bit of wrestling talk, but I'll let you guys be the judge of that. So let's get to it. This is our interview with Jill Thompson. Jill, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, you guys. I was ready to say, and I'm Jill Thompson. You know,
you're an honorary bandit for tonight.
Yeah. So we'll ask the same kickoff question we ask everyone else, and that is, how did you first discover comics?
My very first intro to comics was Peanuts in the newspaper. I really, really loved Snoopy. And when, so that was like comic strips. And then my dad or mom brought me home one of those like little, I don't know, Penguin books, maybe, or like a bunch of Peanuts. I get from an old bookshop, so it was like decaying. And then because I liked those comics so much, I just started being drawn to anything that was, you know, a comic and drawn like that. And I jumped to Archie comics from there. But more specifically, the way I got really hooked on comics was the house down the block from me was moving house. And by moving house, it wasn't just that they were like having a yard sale or a garage sale. It was, they were selling every single thing inside their house because the village that I lived in and like the town was putting municipal parking lots in where their homes were. So they had bought their homes. They were being lifted up by jacks and put on a truck and moved down the to the other side of town, right? So they were selling every single thing in there. And one of the things that was being sold was this orange crate filled with old Archie comics from the 1940s and 50s and 60s. And I had walked down the alley with, you know, like $1 in my hand or something like that. And the lady that was in the house saw me freak out over the box of comics because I had never seen anything like that before. And just let me have the whole thing. And I took the crate home and got addicted to 1940s, 50s, and 60s Archie comics, with my favorite comic artists being, of course, Dan DeCarlo Jr. and Bob Bulling from Little Archie, and then Harry Lucy. So my brother and I read those comics until they fell apart, which is probably, you know, some collector somewhere is going, because they were all super old, even including, I think that like Archie #1 was in there based on but it didn't have, you know how old newsstand comics would sometimes get sent back and they would have the name, the title of the book cut off of it.
Yes.
But I've seen the cover for the first issue of Archie, and I know it was in there. It just didn't. The cover was destroyed on it. And then I, of course, read it till it fell apart, and probably drew in it with the pen. So, and then from then on, I like made a leap to superhero comics at some point. My father started bringing me comics home because I liked Archie comics. He worked downtown in the city, and on certain Fridays, he would stop by a newsstand. And if I saw him come home and he had like a little green paper bag under his arm, that meant he went to the newsstand, and there was probably some Archie comics in there. But every once in a while, he would just buy some other comic that he thought was cool, or because there wasn't a new Archie comic. And I thought anything that wasn't an Archie comic was scary comic, because I did see some things like, oh God, what is it? It's like House of Mystery. I remember like specifically being freaked out by Bernie Wrightson, House of Mystery. The issue has a Bernie Wrightson illustration of Kane, of course, talking to the reader, and Abel is upside down, tied in chains in like a water cooler at an office. And it's like, did you ever read anything that you didn't, like watched a TV show or movie through your fingers like this when you were little? So it was like me kind of reading the whole comic like that. There was a story called Blood on the Moon. I don't remember much in that. It may have been like a werewolf comic, or one of those, like a swamp Louisiana bayou, voodoo curse type of thing. So every once in a while I would get a comic like that and read it, and realize that there was a lot more to comics than just Archie. And then completely getting hooked because there was a Spider-Man that was in the bag one time, and that, it's like Peter Parker totally hooked me.
He has that effect.
Yeah.
So you obviously were into comics from an early age, but you must have also, had a passion to create them, because you went to art school and then got a degree in illustration. What about we don't, of a lot of the guests we've had, we don't have a lot that have gone to art school previous to their breaking in. It's either self-taught, or maybe sort of a trade, sort of Joe Kubert kind of school. But do you think that gave you a real kind of leg up when you went to then break into the industry?
I don't know if it gave me a leg up. I'm incredibly glad I went. I mean, the reason I went was I started going to comic book conventions when I was about 13 with a sketchbook full of incredibly crappy art. And I was the only girl there. This is when a convention was half of a ballroom in a hotel, and the place is filled mostly with, like old book dealers and like a lot of long boxes, and then one card, like a card table, or a couple of folding tables with, a comic book artist and some local artists. And the guy at the door was taking tickets that were like those carnival tickets, where he has like a cash box, and he would, give you a ticket and then take the other half and put it in there, so you'd be able to tell how many people came through the door that day. That was like my very first type of comic book convention. And my father went with me the first time that I went. I was like 13. And, I think he thought he did his fatherly duty, because he was like, well, we did that, which I don't ever want to do again. Right. But I walked into this dank ballroom that had a bunch of, middle-aged men in it, and smelled like decaying paper. And, I had my babysitting money with me, so I could buy back issues of things I never knew existed, like all the Chris Claremont, John Byrne X-Men, which was my goal to get all of. And, it's like, I walked out and he was like, well, did you have fun, sweetie? And I was like, there's another one in 6 weeks. And my dad's like, oh no, I have to go back. So what he would do is he would drop me off, let me go in there by myself, and be like, come out, meet me at the front at 4:00. And he would go somewhere and listen to baseball, football, hockey, whichever game happened to be on, because my dad's a sport guy. And I just milled about. And when there were artists there, I mostly milled about and stared at them as they drew for guys that had money. One of them being John Byrne. And then some of the other people that were there were local Chicago artists. One being Bill Reinhold, who looked at my sketchbook and looked at my crappy comic pages and encouraged me to go to art school. And he encouraged me to go to the art school he went to, which is the American Academy of Art. And he said, you already know about, how comics work, but you need to learn everything else. You need to learn anatomy and design and color theory and perspective. He goes, all of those things end up in your comic. He goes, but you should go to school and learn all that. He's like, you can still like comics while you do it. Just go and learn that. And because I'm a very good student and I like school, that was my goal after that point. I wanted to get into that school. And I did. And it helped me. I mean, the difference in the first day I attended that school and then the last day of my first year, our life drawing teacher would do this, he would have us do the first day you just draw the model. He doesn't tell you anything. He doesn't tell you how to measure out the figure. He doesn't, start teaching you at all. He lets you draw. And that way I think he could estimate, who was incredibly talented and then who was there because they had enough money to go to the school, right? Like any other trade school. And then he collects all those drawings and he was like, see you tomorrow. And then the next day he would start teaching you. But on the very last day of the first year, when you were having your portfolio review, he would pull out that first drawing. So you could see the incredibly huge amount of difference a year of teaching had made for you. And it was, it was pretty remarkable. So I think I just took my enthusiasm and put it behind learning how to do all the rules so then I could break them when I needed to, and also apply all of the rules of excellent illustration and design and composition to comics.
So comics was always part of the plan. Like the schooling was a means to an end of actually getting into comics.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't like I'm going to explore all these different, illustrative concepts or means. It was I was enamored with everything. And once I was in school, I was like, oh, there was other things that I could do. I mean, I sent a resume and a portfolio to Don Bluth Animation, got a nice rejection letter from them, and some other places, but like I never didn't want to do comics. Like that was everything else was going to be and that while I do comics. I didn't have a plan B at all. It was when I drew comics and I started drawing, like doing freelance stuff for little companies while I was in high school. So that helped a lot. And then once I got to school, I was also I started working in comics while I was still finishing art school. So I would do all my classwork and schoolwork and stuff like that. And then I would go home. When I was done with that, I would draw comics until, like 2 a.m. or whatever. So is that when you broke in while you were still in school, like with the First and Now and those kind of?
Look, First and Now came after, Now was the very end of me going to art school. Yeah, and First Comics. Yeah, I did a few things like in my last year of art school, maybe my last 2 years of art school. And by professional, they went from being professional because someone paid you to do some work, to actually a company that people may have heard of. And because in comics, it's once you have performed comic services for someone, that's your resume, more or less. I mean, no one has ever asked me, could they see my, like, I have 2 LinkedIn profiles right now because I signed up because everyone said you have to sign up, and then I forgot about one and I forgot its password. So I signed up and did another one, and now I don't remember that password either. But no one has ever asked me. I'll have to make a complete new one if I ever need to show it. But to draw comics, all you had to do was show the other comic that you did, because that meant, one, you knew how to do a comic. Someone else already took a chance on you. And you knew how to meet a deadline, if more or less.
So you had a kind of a running start through school, because you're building your portfolio through your schoolwork, but also through these first assignments you were getting during that time as well.
And I'd done some gaming work at that time too, for superhero role-playing games, that was a lot of good practice as well. And any role-playing game I was involved in, I was the one that drew your character, so I got to do the practice that way too.
So how did you get your break into the business?
Which part of the business? What do you consider the business? Because I've already talked about, like, I got my job at First Comics because it was a Chicago-based company, by going over and having an interview with the art director, and then he gave me an 8-page backup Munden's Bar story in a Grimjack comic, and that was my first published work at First Comics. With my other work there was, once I graduated, was it one? No, sorry, it was. So, and then my next job was following Mike Mignola on the Chronicles of Corum. So, and that was because I had done Munden's Bar. I had met Steve Root and Mike Barron at conventions when I was a teenager, and was completely in love with Steve Root's art, still am. And he introduced me to Andrew Loomis, who was actually an illustrator who's like books. So you can, like, they're amazing books, but his books were, I don't even know how to say it, like the foundation of my art school.
Okay.
And so thankfully, a lot of the artists that I met at the time were very much interested in, older illustrators from the 1940s and 50s, and the golden age of magazine illustration and stuff like that. And the school that I went to, that was pretty much its focus, was to teach you how to do all types of illustration and painting and photography and design work. And then First Comics was like literally right across the river from my school. And I was determined to get a job in comics. And, once you start meeting people at comic conventions, you start meeting the people that work at the company, and the fact that the company was local, I kind of haunted that place. And then a guy that I had worked with, worked on some of the like very small kind of self-published comics. He got a job there as a production designer. And then, so I would go over there and hang out with him, and eventually, just started to get work, mostly, I think, because I was there. And then I got it done and made my deadline. And then they like, do you want more work? And then once I had that work, I sent samples to Kamiko Comics at the time, which was in Philadelphia, and ended up doing, that was while I was still in art school as well, that did the Fathom miniseries of the Elementals, and then I did a bunch of issues of the Elementals, but most of that stuff was done while I was still in art school. So I mean, to me, that's breaking in.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we'd love to hear.
And then having that was my resume to get other things. A lot of it was happenstance, and I was in the right place at the right time.
So doing our research for you, when you're I guess you started working at DC, and your early work on Wonder Woman received praise from George Perez, and that must have been fantastic for you.
Wait, is there a quote?
No, I don't have a quote, but I'm just researching online in Wikipedia. I hope there was.
Wikipedia, though. Well, I mean, that was kind of to have your first job in comics being paired up with one of your art heroes was incredibly intimidating. I learned so much, and having never even met him until well after I was done with the with the run on Wonder Woman, just working from a script, because George would write scripts for himself. I mean, I write scripts for myself now. You write for the style you're comfortable in, but George was comfortable doing 19 panels a page with like 7 Amazons in each panel. So I look back at some of that work, and I can't even believe how I even got all of that done, because I don't think I could do that now. But it was, I guess, most of it was adrenaline and trying to prove yourself and trying to live up to the legacy of the guy that was writing it. It's like, I want to be at least like a tiny bit as good as him, but also wanting to bring all of my influences to it. I'm not sure that it came out, or that anyone else can see the things that I put in it, but I know exactly all of the intense emotion that I brought to those comics.
I do have a quote for you, if you want to hear it.
You were
in reference to your chalk drawings story in Wonder Woman 46. George Perez stated, quote, "It was a good, quiet story, and I think Jill and I worked really well together on that one."
Yes, nobody hit anybody in the face with a car in that story. But also it was way heavy duty as the pretty much the first story, big story that you get to be about such a subject. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is our quiet scenes. I like to make the characters act. It's like it's a 2-dimensional medium, but I want to bring animated qualities to it. This is what I tell my students all the time. You're not doing the in-between of you're doing the key animation if you are an animator. So even the quiet moments need something to play off of. So they have to really stand out. And that one, was a funeral, and Diana and every character that knew Vanessa Capitelis and her friend, and super heavy duty subjects, and I wanted to be able to do it justice. And I was terrified too. I was both like completely over the moon excited to do it, and then also terrified that I was going to screw it up somehow.
Well, I wonder what your thoughts were going into the next project we wanted to talk about, which is your first of several or many on Sandman, which is the Brief Lives storyline in the main book. and
Well, that
work.
was my favorite comic at the time. Once, and that was kind of funny because while I was working on Wonder Woman, I guess Neil Gaiman would come into the DC offices from time to time. And before there was Vertigo, Karen was the group editor on Wonder Woman and Swamp Thing, and then the new Sandman thing. And the way that it used to work before everything was scanned in and people were working digitally. I mean, and I still work traditionally, except that I can scan things. But it's like you would do your batch of pages, you'd pack them in an envelope, throw them in FedEx box, and send them to DC. And then they would all be on Karen's desk at some point. So my penciled pages would be on the desk because she would be ushering them. There's like, these pages have to go to the letterer, or the letterer would be in-house. And then they would take those pages and then they would go to the inker, and, or they would be all being shuffled back and forth at different times. So there were times when Neil was in the office and he would get to see my penciled pages that were sitting on her desk. And he would ask, who is this artist? At least this is what he tells. This is what I have been told. He tells another story about it as well. But so Karen said, well, this is Jill Thompson. And he was like, oh, I would really like to, I think she would be right for, this brief life story, which he told me at the time was supposed to be 3 issues. And boy, am I glad it was not. I'm glad it was 9 issues. And then she would say, oh, I'm sorry, she's under contract. And he was like, oh, okay, well then I guess I'll just wait. And apparently, but I didn't know any of this until I had a change in assistant editors on Wonder Woman. And then, so this editor, Dan Thorsland, who came in at the end when he was kind of shuffling through now that he was the editor on the end of my my run on Wonder Woman, and said, Neil Gaiman's in here always asking about, when's your contract up, because he wants you to work on Sandman. And I was like, I broke into a full body sweat at that point. I can remember standing with an old, phone with the antenna you have to pull out, by the receiver, and soaking through my shirt, like, what? And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And he was like, yeah, he goes, I actually think you probably be really much better suited for that book. Not that I don't like what you do on here. He goes, but you do people acting so good. And I think would be so much better on that book. He goes, let me see if I can get your contract moved over and see when he wants to start that. And then, because my other editor had never told me that. And so I really kind of credit Dan Thorsland for actually helping it happen, because I was like, yes, I would like that very much. I would like that a lot. And then suddenly I was drawing Sandman.
That's amazing, and kudos to him for telling you and
I'm assuming that type of thing doesn't
leave.
happen. I'm assuming that type of thing doesn't happen often, where you can just be like, you know what, you're good here, and we'll just very quietly move everything that way.
But I also wonder how many times it doesn't happen when someone's like, oh no, they're busy, they have this contract. Right. And this thing could have happened with, not necessarily with Neil Gaiman, but with other people that could be really well suited to pair up on projects, and they're like, oh, no, I'm sorry, they're working on this, instead of, because I see a lot of, well, back in the day, not so much now, but a lot of mismatched pair-ups of penciler, inker, and things. And I mean, I think sometimes it's because the people who are working, not every editor has an art background. Many of them do, but some of them don't. And I think that some people get paired up just because they can get it done, or they're both available, instead of, this looks good together,
So it's convenience sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, so much of comics, some monthly comics is convenience, or maybe not monthly comics anymore, but monthly comics in 1989 and before, and 1990 and stuff was convenience.
So Brief Lives, mostly for those who haven't read it, and I'm sure most of you have, but is primarily concerned or focused on Delirium and sort of a quest that Delirium, the character, Dream's sister, goes on to, I believe, track down her brother or their brother, Destruction. So what my question is, even though Delirium had appeared earlier in the series, given that she was going to play such a large role in this storyline, how much sort of freedom, wiggle room did you have in terms of kind of defining her look and, to your point, acting and movement?
Well, with acting and movement, I acted her out all the time. But as far as what she looked like, Neil told me she looks like Tori Amos. And that's what I based her on. And I mean, immediately, because Neil and Tori Amos are friends, I was living in Cleveland at the time when I was working on Sandman for the Cleveland area. And Tori was coming through a small venue in Cleveland. And Neil said, "Oh, well, Tori's going to be in your area, I think. I'll tell her that she should just, have a ticket for you. And then you should watch her. And then you should meet her afterwards, then draw her," which is what I did. And it was literally in the downstairs of, like a small venue that holds like a couple of hundred people. And I got to go meet her immediately after the show and sketch her. And I found my sketchbook that had some of the sketches in it actually the other day, because I never finished sketchbooks. And I have this monumental, cool looking sketchbook from 1990 that doesn't have all of the pages filled in, but it's got and I posted some of it on my Instagram. It's got some of my first concept drawings of like how I was trying to figure out who Dream should look like. And of course there's like a Christian Slater version because 1990. And then also just a cool drawing of Keanu Reeves just because, but then all these other sketches. And I found a guy that was local that had a look that I liked very much. And I actually took a bunch of photographs of him, with a lot of different light sources on them to use as my dream. But as far as Delirium goes, the way her face is shaped and her eye shape and her lips shape was Tori Amos. And then everything else afterwards was, changed. She didn't always have, her hair or her actual figure, but it was just certain features about her, like the very elfin quality that she has.
So I would love to know, what was the creative process like between you and Neil working on, Sandman?
Creative process, he would send me these awesome scripts, which sound very much like if you listen to the Audible Sandman.
Yes.
That's out. Neil narrating. I mean, once you've heard Neil read, you can't help but hear everything that he's ever written in his voice. I mean, at least I can't. And but I know based on I haven't listened to this new season of the Audible. Like I haven't listened to the third Audible app of Sandman all the way through. So I'm not sure when it gets up to my part if there's a lot, but in everything else that I read, I know it's the art direction from the scripts that he had given us, just because I can tell. And when I was first listening to it, I had to message him right away. I said, "This is crazy," because I also messaged Jerk Mags and said, this is I feel right now like my whole brain and body feels like what I felt like when I was first drawing Sandman while I'm listening to this, because it's like hearing the scripts all over again. So I would get, as far as back as going through the process again, I would get scripts from Neil. He was living in England. I was in Ohio at the time. And I would get a fax. Actually, it started out, the very first one, I got the entire script all at once. And then the rest of the issues of brief lives, I mostly got them in chunks because Neil was always somewhere signing. He was around the world or around the United States or around Europe or wherever. And any place he could stop, if it was an airport or a hotel or whatever, he would have his, whatever the giant ass chunky version of a laptop was back in the day. It probably weighed about 30 pounds, I bet. And he would be hooked up to the internet. He would fax from his computer a couple of pages, or he would write a page in the airport and fax it to me. But then I also remember drawing some of Sandman on airplanes, because then I also was going around and doing signings and stuff like that, or going to conventions. And that's when Economy was big enough where I could draw a full-size comic page, like on the plane, like just right up against the seat in front of me, and there was plenty of room. Nobody was uncomfortable.
So not Spirit Airlines.
No, not at all. Yeah,
so help me God if the guy reclines.
Yeah, there's no way. And then Neil and I would talk on the phone a lot because we're both chatty. And so I'm a person who enjoys feedback, and Neil would give me feedback, and he would give me positive feedback. And that really fueled stuff, made me feel like I was hitting the right buttons. And he said sometimes I would draw things the way he saw it in his head, which to me was like the biggest compliment you could give me.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because, from the way you're describing, it seems like you gelled very well with him. And we've heard people describe that, he's so detailed in the story that he's telling, and the artists are just compelled to basically include everything in whatever it is that is, the subject matter. And, there's just, and if you see anything that's Sandman related, like there's a lot going on there.
There's a difference between, it's not detailed like he's writing all these things that you needed to put in there. If you read any of his other prose work, you know how you read one of his stories and it makes you get a visual picture. Mm-hmm. That's how his art direction is. So it's like the art direction is a story that he's telling you before the dialogue happens. Sometimes it would be peppered with asides to you personally, which I always found interesting. And I know somewhere I've got a box of some of the scripts, because I would draw all of my thumbnails all over them, and I don't throw very much away, but I may have lost things in floods and whatnot. Yeah, he's detailed in the fact that he paints a verbal picture for you. I've worked the opposite way as well, where you get a massive paragraph of art direction, and it's almost like Marley's chains in the Christmas Carol. It's like it keeps adding a link and a link of a burden on top of you, where you're like, oh my God, how am I going to get stop telling me these, telling me about the way the lock is on the window, or the fact that there's 3 knots in the pull shade, unless they're really particular. It's like you're taking all of my job away from me to help dress the set and help create the mood. Because sometimes I think people who write comics feel like, because they want so badly for the artist to be able to see what's in their head, that they start to try and describe every single thing instead of giving them a great, like a tasty visual picture. You can talk about the character of a place, which will give a person an idea. Like if you're talking about like a seedy, greasy diner where, it's got good food, but it's from an era long ago and might have some paneling and, that should have been taken out a long time ago, but the food's good. Gives you a better idea than saying this diner is 10 foot wide by 29 feet long, and it has, maroon leather banquettes that are chipped away, which are 4 feet by 2 feet. I mean, sometimes you get people who are describing things like every single thing. And while I like some detail, I sometimes it's overwhelming. So Neil doesn't do that. It's like he gives you the perfect amount.
Cool.
And he also asks you before you start working with him, he asks you, what is it that you like to draw the most? And what do you like to draw the least? And he writes to your strengths. Or at least that's what he did for me. And because I had just been working on Wonder Woman, I was like, I very much like to not hit anyone in the face with a car in this comic, because I don't like drawing the undersides of cars, and I also don't like drawing cars because they're really difficult, the right proportion of people if you have to stand next to them, the same way some people don't like to draw horses. Also very difficult. Not that I can't do it, but oh my gosh, it's tedious, So I wanted there to be less tedium and more acting, I guess.
Do you think that we'll see some of the stuff you worked on, with Sandman in like upcoming seasons?
Oh my God, I hope so.
Okay. So I know, I got very excited. It got,
they might, I don't know. I don't, people ask me, oh, do you know what's going on? Of course I don't know what's going on. I don't have that kind of connection. But I'm assuming, based on things that Neil said online, it's and just going chronologically, it has to be Season of Mists that happened. But I feel like they can drag some elements in from other things to introduce the whole family. I'm sure in the second shot, they're going to probably try and introduce the whole family. And then that'll be Delirium. And my God, who will play Delirium? Because, I don't know, that I couldn't even think of anyone. I would want it to be someone that nobody knew, but I totally have incredibly complete and utter faith in whomever that they decide to choose to be perfect. Because watching that show, I was astonished at how much, it was just this weird amalgam of how you make a two-dimensional comic come to life perfectly. Tom Sturridge, looks, I keep saying I really have to correct myself on that. He looks like Craig Russell drew him. I said that 4 or 5 times while I was watching. It's like, to no one, to this cat probably while I was watching, it's like, it looks like Craig drew him. I can't, look at that. And I would stop and pause the screen. It's like Sandman 50. God, they have to do Ramadan because I have to see this guy look just like Craig drew him. Holy mackerel. And Desire is perfect. Corinthian, everything. I really, really enjoyed all of it. And I cried actually a couple of times during it because it was so perfect and moving, and it wasn't even my issues, but I feel, very protective of all of those characters. They're like my family.
Yeah, it's very well done.
The casting is amazing. And I don't think we could, I bet there's no way we can guess what the casting decisions would be, because I think they would be people we haven't even thought of.
Yeah. Or someone that we already know exists, but when we see them as whomever, because my favorite thing all the time is, there are so many shows on so many streaming services and so many actors and actresses that have been in things that I've just never even seen. And to see Desire, Despair, the person that played Despair. I don't know the name of the actress, but to see them on the red carpet when my only vision of them is as Despair, right? I don't know anything about this lady's long history and resume in acting. Once I found it, I was like, oh my gosh, look at all this. I'll have to watch all of these things, but to see them, in their human form, and then to see them made up, I think that's why I like it better, not knowing, is because they've inhabited the characters so perfectly. And it's also interesting to see how many Sandman fans there are in actors that maybe you just never knew before. But I'm finding that Neil is like my 6 degrees of separation to probably every actor on the planet at this point.
So we don't want to overdo it with Sandman questions, but I do have one more because you've played in this sandbox quite a bit, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended.
Especially now with a cat in my lap, right?
Exactly.
That's definitely a sandbox I'd rather deal in than
the one I wanted to pick out just for further insight is At Death's Door, because it has a very highly specific style to it. I mean, it's very manga-esque or just straight up manga. And I'm just curious what the genesis of that project was and why you chose manga as the style for that story.
I didn't chose manga, it chose me. It was strange. Another one, not necessarily right place at right time, but everyone kept mentioning me. So apparently, when manga started, hitting the US in waves and waves in the late 90s, early 2000s, I had loved Japanese animation, anime, and bootleg Miyazaki movies on copies of videotapes, and go to the Mitsubishi Japanese mall to go get big phone book size comics of things I would never be able to read, but at least I would, before they were widely available and translated, right? I would go get that stuff and love it and just go like, whoa, look at this. So when manga started going crazy everywhere, I guess people started asking Karen Berger. Well, first people started asking, both Neil and Karen Berger. There were a lot of bookstore representatives that would approach them and say, why don't you make this as a manga? And when they would approach Neil would say, I don't know enough about manga to feel comfortable doing that, but I think Jill Thompson could do it. And then apparently, completely separately, without any prompting from anybody, another bookstore, like maybe from Barnes and Noble or I forget which one, rep had gone to Karen Berger and said, you guys are really blowing it by not having, so many of these Vertigo stories could be great manga. They're like, Sandman would make a great shoujo manga. And Karen was like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it does. She was like, it's like, and somebody, I didn't even know who this person was. Like, well, you should get Jill Thompson to do it. So 2 people had mentioned that I should do some kind of manga version of Sandman. And thankfully, Neil just trusted me to do it and agreed that, oh, I'm sure Jill could do it. And then Karen Berger called me up and said, hey, a bunch of people are thinking that you might be able to do this. We would probably like to do that. What do you think? Do you think you could do it? And I just went, sure. And hung up the phone and goes, boy, I hope I can do that. And apparently the same day I said, sure, they put it on the schedule. And I had to figure out what it was that I was going to do. And I realized that, you know, I was told I could make up a whole new story, which I kind of did. But I thought, if they're trying to start a line of manga based on Vertigo characters, I mean, I could see like totally awesome Japanese style version of like Constantine and like all sorts of stuff. I mean, I thought they could just readapt all sorts of things. But as far as Sandman went, it's like, if I'm trying to tell a story, you want to introduce the whole family. You want to get people hooked on the original stories that we already have. So how do you get them into there? What is, like, a lot of retailers that I would meet over the years would say the way they got people hooked on Sandman is they would give them Season of Mist, even though it wasn't the very first issue. They would give them that one, and they said, if you don't like that, you can bring it back. But if you like it, you got to buy it. And they not only would, of course, like it, they would come back and they would buy everything else and start, you know, like buy four volumes or whatever, and then buy the issues after that. So I thought, well, that's a good place to start, because shoujo manga has a lot of like drama. A lot of shoujo manga is high school drama, and this could kind of be high school drama. And you've got a cute girl that you could use as the thing. And then I was thinking, like, what? I can't just start trying to think of a whole new story, because I don't want to mess with the characters or the storyline or anything. So what can I do that will bring the flavor of manga to this and still stay true? And then I thought of that one scene in Season of Mist where Death is peeking out of her frame in Dream's gallery, and she's a bit perturbed with him because he's moping over that key, not figuring out what to do, and the denizens of hell are wandering the earth. And I went, well, that's my story, because I know how it ends. Everything goes back to the way it is at the end when he finally gives the key to the right people. And we can have a wacky adventure behind the scenes to find out what the heck's Death been doing, including a little bit of the Dead Boy Detective stuff, because we had to show that. And I thought, well, who else would be there for the Dead Boy Detectives? You know, it's like when, I think it was Payne, who was in the attic. Payne was the blonde, I forget. I can't remember the other boy's name right now. But when he's up there delirious after being, you know, 1920s schoolboy hazed to death up in an attic, I was like, he's delirious because he's dying, and he's, you know, going through his death throes and stuff like that. And everyone thinks of delirium as showing up, you know, she's kind of like, I always draw her kind of like happy and confused, and, you know, that kind of like fun little buzz you might get if you're drinking, or maybe, I don't know, I don't smoke, but like you smoke pot or whatever. But most of delirium is not any state you want to be in. You know, it's people going through withdrawal, or people having fever dreams, or people having like horrible death-like illness fever dreams, or dehydration, or you know, lost hiking and the elements have gotten to them and they're having that kind of delirium. And like, I didn't focus on that as much, but that's the type of delirium that, you know, gets seen a little bit in that book, you know. So I figured I could tell a delightful little manga romp in between one of the heavy dutiest, most intense graphic novels of the Sandman run.
Very cool.
Because a bunch of other people had faith in me that I could do it, and I kind of was just given free rein to wing it. But it took a very long time because I did all of it. I lettered it, I penciled and inked it. The only thing I didn't do it was add tone, except that I marked up 192 pages of Xeroxes with tone where I wanted it, and then handed them to Lear Lowridge who did an excellent job. And I feel bad about like even giving him those indications, but it's like I was not skilled to do that on the computer, or else I would have done that myself as well. But it took an incredibly long time, because I think it was 192 pages.
Wow.
And they kept asking me like, well, where's the next one? And I was like, I was hoping that you guys would have other people doing these as I was doing them, so you could hit the ground running with like a whole fleet of them. But I think they expected me to just then start doing more. And that's when I had to say, you realize in Japan, there would be a team of me working on this, not just me. So, yeah, I don't think I can do that again. And then I moved on to something else after that. But I liked it a lot.
Very cool.
And it's amazing artifact.
So to shift gears a little bit from Sandman, you were involved in some work for wrestling. You designed ring gear for Daniel Bryan.
Yes.
How did you get involved with that?
Daniel Bryan likes comics, and Daniel Bryan, okay, so my friend Joanne had a blog called Hot Dudes Reading Comics, and he was on there reading Beast of Burden.
We're in that, right, Mike? No?
Yeah, exactly.
Of course you are. And I mean, I wonder if she's still, well, I don't think she has that blog anymore, because who has a blog? But now it would be like a TikTok of Hot Dudes Reading Comics, which now it could be any guy on television and every single wrestler. So, but back in the day, he's reading Beasts of Burden, and I was like, oh my God, the American Dragon is reading Beasts of Burden. And then Joanne.
Oh, wait a sec. Hold on. So you're a wrestling fan?
I am a wrestling fan.
Because you call them American Dragon.
That's right.
Awesome.
And so she said, he's on Twitter. Here's his Twitter handle. And that's back when I actually was on the account that I had that's floating around doing nothing. And I tweeted at him. And I just said, hey, I saw you reading this on this thing. Who's your favorite character? I'll draw him for you. And then he messaged me back. His favorite character was Jack, by the way, Beagle. And then he DM'd me and he said, hey, I heard, it's like you draw comics, right? And I was like, yep. And he said, have you ever designed ring gear? He goes, I want to look like a superhero. And I said, I can do that. And then we just started talking and about what it was that he wanted. And he was in NXT at the time. So it wasn't, it's like while he was in NXT, he still had his, just kind of nondescript trunks, and he was doing the whole angle that was happening there. But once he jumped into actual WWE, I designed most of his ring gear for the beginning of that. I have, like a file folder filled with all of the stuff I did, including stuff that never made it to the screen, because like I remember the last thing I was going to make for him when he was still doing yes, right? Mm-hmm. And I had this beautiful, like one day I'll throw it up there. I'd have to message him and because I would love to do a little book of all the gear that I designed for wrestling.
So you've done others as well.
Yeah, it was some of my favorites, and it never saw the light of day. And I remember that night, and I was like, because he, his gear changed a lot, and he wanted, mm-hmm. It's new gear for every pay-per-view. So not only did I have to design the gear, but I'm always in touch with the guys at Main Event Gear that were doing the actual sewing of it. So and I've sewn a little, so was kind of helpful, because when I would suggest fabric, or I would suggest, I was forever designing a leather jacket, which is a big pain in the ass apparently. But I had this cool leather jacket and this other gear going, and these amazing kick pads that were going, and it was all yes related. And he's saying yes, and then he just goes, no. And then no started. And I was like, well, I guess that's not going to work because no. I was like, now I got to, like, I had to switch gears immediately. And by the end of the evening, he texted me and was like, he goes, hey, I need some no gear. And I was like, yeah, I figured I'm already on it. Don't worry. I had to change it. So jumped on that. And that was really fun. I mean, it was really exciting to see all of, it's like, I never knew what it was going to look like until he came out. So I was just, sitting at the edge of my seat waiting to see what happened. I mean, I remember the Tully Blanchard, Ric Flair style WrestleMania robe that he wore in the 18-second match that he got kicked in the head with Sheamus. That thing cost.
I am so impressed with your wrestling knowledge. No one else we talked. That's awesome.
That's who I based it on. I was like,
that's great.
When we would talk about stuff, he would say who he was, what kind of an angle he was going for. And then I would say, well, how long is this going to go on? Because I go, you could start out Tully Blanchard and you could get yourself all the way up to Ric Flair, but that would mean a certain amount of robes designed. And it turned out that there was not enough time and we had to jump straight into like a mixture of that. So I had all of these designs, and the people that did the most work on that thing, that apparently I told him, I was like, I want to wear that at some point before I die. I want to put that on. And he, but Robert and Patrick at Main Event Gear, like they were telling me how many crystals and sequins was going on there and how long that thing took or how fast they had to make something that was so elaborate. And then to have it be like an 18-second gimmick was just like, what? Just like, thank God I didn't turn my head to get my drink, and because it would have been over. And that thing was gorgeous.
That's really, really cool. So since you live in Chicago, did you do anything for CM Punk or any involvement with working with him?
I designed his wrestling t-shirt for when he headlined WrestleMania.
Very cool. My wife will be very thrilled to hear that too. She loves it. So I know you also
Punk designed all his own gear.
Oh, okay.
I mean, anything you see, like all his I always loved his gear. Like all of his I loved his Chicago, centric trunks. I mean, he was only working with, underpants real estate. It's not like he ever wore jackets.
Right.
That were, and he had t-shirts and stuff like that, and probably hoodies. But as far as when he designed gear, it was trunks and kick pads. So, you didn't have a lot of other stuff to work with. And the fact that he did Hawks trunks at one point, and then even when he had Randy Savage Chicago gear and all that kind of stuff. He's a Cubs fan. I'm not, but Cubs gear and whatnot. That was always very cool.
That's really cool. I hope you don't mind me saying, just I never meet many women who just have such wrestling knowledge as you, and it gave me goosebumps. I only knew one. And she actually ended up working for WWE. She was one of the writers for a while. But
oh man, what I want to work for right now, and I know he's probably not listening to this, is I want to work with Freddie Prinze Jr. and the Federation.
He's starting his own federation, I think, right?
I have never enjoyed a podcast more than Wrestling with Freddie. How I liked the first season better than the second season so far, just because I loved stories. But I don't think there's any more than him and his wife. It's like, if I could have him and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and we could talk comics and D&D and wrestling and Buffy, and also he cooks. So I was like I love these people. I want to hang out with them.
And they seem very down to earth.
Yes, they do.
Now you also did some illustration work for Mick Foley's book.
Yes.
How did you get involved with that? Because that was really cool.
Well, I have to say, when when me and Charles Vest and Jeff Smith and Linda Medley and Stan Sakai were doing the trilogy tour way back in 1993. We were away like in Tennessee building this big tree and crates and making these giant standing stones so we could make our cool exhibit area. I had to rush back at one point to my motel room so I could watch Hell in a Cell when the Undertaker threw Mick Foley off the thing, and I was freaking out in my, I paid for a pay-per-view in a motel, so, and I'm screaming like an idiot, like, I think he's dead, oh my God. And it sounded just like JR. And
you did. And I was our friend Oren, who's usually with us with it, I was at his house watching that pay-per-view, and we all did the same.
And I couldn't believe it. And it like totally cemented my, holy crap, I totally, that was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And Mankind's promos were so incredible, but also Cactus Jack's promos were like, still like my favorite promo. However, I have to say, MJF's way is like, I think he's kind of taken over everything. But as far as Mick goes, that was like, I think the same year WWE and Chaos Comics were putting out comics, and I wanted to draw some of them. And there was a panel with him at and Brian Polito knew that I really liked wrestling and that I loved Mankind, Mick Foley. And so that's the one thing I ran away from my table for at the convention, was so I could just stand in the back of the panel convention hall room and listen to him. And then afterwards, Brian brought me up so I could meet him. And I have a picture, like a Polaroid picture of us hugging. And then I kind of freakishly stalked him, because Brian mentioned, I had to go back to my table, and then Mick had to go do whatever he was going to do. And I was like, does he have kids? Because like, I'm not a stalker. I just found out where he was doing a personal appearance. I found out that he had kids, so I sent him some Scary Godmother stuff, and then sent my studio information. I was like, because I had heard someone said he wanted to do a children's book, and I just sent him my stuff and said, hey, I heard you might be looking for someone to do that, hit me up. And then, but I sent it to the place he was going to do a signing, which to me was pretty stalkerish. And I expected to never hear anything from it, but I sent it to wherever he was doing his next signing, and he apparently got it, opened it up, read it, and called and left a message on my answering machine in my studio, where I kind of went crazy. And my ex-husband, when I called him about it, he thought someone broke into my studio because I was screeching and screaming and so out of control. And I was like, but I was just so excited that Mick had called, and then he really wanted to do children's books, and he really wanted to do a book about Santa Claus, which we never got to do. But we got to do other books together.
Very cool.
And I became friends with him, and he's like a really, really good friend of mine.
That's awesome. I saw one of his shows when he was doing like a tour of like stand-up shows.
Yeah.
And very interesting. Really, really interesting.
He tells great stories.
Yeah.
Well, I feel left out.
Sorry, Mike. Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, I love that you guys have a passion that I don't. It's totally fine.
Mike gives us.
What do you like? We talk about gaming or cooking or bicycle riding? What about
I do like cooking. I don't have as much time for it as I'd like to, but
what about
I hear you're a gardener.
Mike used to tease us for watching wrestling, so let's.
I watched back in the cartoon days of like, what was the cartoon with Junkyard Dog. And
Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling.
exactly. I mean, that's when it was, that's my wrestling.
Right now I'm very much enjoying Rhea Ripley.
Very
I'm
cool.
totally straight, but I'm in love with that woman.
She's just jacked.
Well, no, she has the best smile ever. It's the most perfect smile, and also evil,
Yeah,
evil, because you can't mess around with the glamazon, and she did. So,
it's all right.
I don't know. Right. I'm so conflicted.
I'll be going to AEW on Wednesday, so looking forward to that.
Jealous. I'm jealous.
Yeah, this guy. Sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I was like, man, now I'm going to shift into something that may not be as cool. I find it kind of cool, which is you have kind of like a side hustle, or at least have had a few opportunities to be a character model. I mean, for yourself, obviously with Scary Godmother, but also I think with your aforementioned P. Craig Russell, whom we talked to in one of his opera adaptations, and then for Alex Ross, I think before. What's were just opportunities kind of jump out at you, or was it something you always you thought like I can act out these characters for myself and other people, and it's a good
good
I
mean, I was asked both times. It's not like I go knocking on the doors of people. Hey, you need a villainous face. But Craig, I used to live a couple of blocks away from Craig in Ohio. When I lived in Ohio for about 4.5 years. And so we were good friends and we would hang out. And Craig, I have an expressive face. I have an improv background. I used to go to Second City Training Center and the Players Workshop here in Chicago. And I was in an improv troupe when I lived in Ohio, travel around and do shows. So when Craig famously has a cadre of friends and family and people he meets that he sees as characters for people in operas that he's illustrating or stories that he's illustrating. And he asked me, to be in many of them. I also, I have expressive hands. I talk with my hands all the time. So he got a lot of use out of that, except he just says he doesn't need to take photographs of me anymore because he can just draw me out of his head. And he took, I'd say probably 600 photos of me. So there's no angle of me that he doesn't have already. He would just have to put different hair on me. I mean, one time he had me in this like makeshift Brunhilde chainmail. The funny thing now is I have friends who have chainmail, so we wouldn't have had to make the thing that he had. But it was, a t-shirt that he just drew little, scale mail or whatever on, and with the sleeves cut off so you could see how it drapes and how light hit it. But he had his old Elric helmet that he had made for when he worked on Elric, so he could, light it different ways. And it's just this beautiful thing that he has. So he had me in this janky, cheap plastic wig with my hair was huge at the time. It's like a big curly hair. And I had to shove that under a wig cap and then put this wig on and then try and squeeze this Elric helmet on. And then we went out to a pasture somewhere where my friends had a horse, and we got me up on a horse.
You're breaking up. Sorry, I hate to interrupt.
That was super funny, and I don't think I've ever had with all of those layers underneath. Oh no, I thought you were just listening intently, but you were frozen.
No, we froze for a second. And
okay.
Yeah.
We got most of it.
Yeah. No,
what did you not get? I can say
you were squeezing your the wig into the hat. And
okay, yeah.
In a pasture.
And then they put me up on a horse.
The horse. I think that's what we
oh, Ron, what did you just knock off? my cats destroyed something. What was that I needed? Important thing. Huh?
See, Mike, it's not just you. That happens.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
My
I
cat's
know.
knocks.
It's I just don't know what he knocked off. He liked to break things. He breaks things when it's time for a treat. It's 8 p.m. here, which is cat treat time.
Mhm.
So he'll just have to be patient. Yeah, so that way, Craig had me pose for a bunch of things. And then as far as Alex Ross goes, back, in the early 90s, a bunch of Chicago comic artists would get together every Tuesday and go out to lunch, and everyone would bring the work that they had done to, share and show what you were doing. Alex being one of them. Actually, Alex arranged it. He usually was the guy that did the arranging. And hold on, I gotta get the cat. Over. How come every time I'm talking to people, round, I hear you. Come on, go, round, go, round. I swear there's probably not any kind of online thing I've ever done lately that hasn't had that happen. Exactly. But Alex, he just asked me to pose for Kingdom Come for Joker's daughter because got a jokery face.
That's pretty cool. So we want to be mindful of your time, but we wanted to ask, and you mentioned it earlier briefly, but creating Scary Godmother series.
Yes. Which part? The comic?
The comic. How did that come about, and what was what fueled that really? Oh, sorry.
Well, again, not as dramatic a story as everyone would like. At the time, this was actually during the kind of comics bust in the mid 90s, right? So I had been contentedly jumping from comic to comic, Vertigo comic, because I think Neil Gaiman set the precedent. Instead of someone being on a story or being on a book under a contract for a year or 2 years or whatever, artists, there was so much stuff happening and so many things to work on at the time that people would just be, I think writers got used to using someone for a story arc. So you didn't have to stay on something all the way like you did, because there was plenty of work everywhere. And I was leapfrogging from one thing to the next, happily jumping from story to story, which really was good. And then the bust happened, and everybody that had been offered like a permanent gig on the book instead of being on the storyline, they signed, and I was in mid-leap and there was no lily pad to land on. So suddenly, where I had been easily jumping from story to story, I had to, I didn't have any work. There was nothing open. It was like, no, sorry, we got nothing, he's on this book for a year, or this is going to be a 2-year deal. I was like, oh my God. So I had to go back to doing gaming art and advertising art for a while. And it was at that time, I remember Todd Johnson from Tribe had said to me once, you ought to do a comic about yourself. I was like, or why don't you do a creator-owned comic? And I said, well, I don't really have an idea. And he said, well, you're interesting looking. You should do a comic about you. And I was like, I also don't have an idea about me. I kind of draw myself into a bunch of things, but I have a lot of interesting drawings, but I don't have, that's about it. You know how you scribble something and the costume looks cool, but there's no story to go with it. But it just so happened that at the same time, I was going to be an aunt for the first time, and I wanted to make a present for the baby, and also I wanted to be the godmother, because I thought being a godmother was, if anything happens to the parents, you get the baby. And that way you can have a baby without having the messy actual pregnancy and birth of a baby. But of course, there would be tragedy involved in it. But actually, the godmother in the Catholic Church, or the godparents, are responsible for the spiritual upbringing of that child. And since I am a very lapsed Catholic, whose religious views would skew more towards the witchy area, I thought about myself standing in the back of the Catholic Church, being a lot more goth than I am now, with my big crazy red hair, my motorcycle jacket, and my black, this, that, and the other thing. And I said, I'd be a pretty scary godmother. And when I said those things, I immediately had a little vision of kind of like a little black tutu Tinkerbell style fairy, who was very much like the scary godmother looks, except some teeny. And so I sketched that out because I was like, oh, that's kind of cute. And then when I drew her big, and I was like, well, I'll make a book for the baby about her scary godmother. And then I just started asking. It was almost like an improv, because I just kept asking myself questions that I actually ended up having answers for. It's like, well, she's your scary godmother. Okay, well, what'd she do? Well, she teaches you that it's okay to be afraid, or that things aren't so scary. Okay, but she likes creepy stuff. Cool. Okay, where does she live? Well, a haunted house, of course. Who are her friends? The monster under the bed. And it's like, my mom used to say, don't let the bugaboos get you. His name is Bugaboo. It's like, well, what about was the skeleton in the closet? And everything just kept coming and coming and coming and coming. And it was coming faster than I could write it down. And then I actually had a story for it. And so I started to actually physically draw a story, thinking I would, paint and draw and then bind together this book. And then suddenly it hit me, and I went, hey, wait a minute. This is that thing Todd Johnson was talking about. I've got a story, and I've got a book, and I've got characters. Oh my God. And then I started shopping it around.
You said that wasn't an interesting story. That was awesome.
Oh, okay.
that was actually pretty damn cool. I mean, beautiful in many ways too.
I'm glad.
I mean, I would totally want a godmother like you.
Yeah, Hannah's like in her mid-20s now. Everyone expects that you think you're, I need the story of how you sat down at your table one day and you said, I'm going to write the coolest witch thingy in the whole world. And then it just happens. It's like, none of my ideas have happened like that. They happen while I'm riding my bike, or, gardening, or doing some other thing, or driving, usually driving when I can't write anything down. Thank God I can yell, hey Siri, and don't.
That's exactly why we asked that question, for that exact reason, because, look, yeah, there are many people who say, well, I got to write this next story for insert title here. And they sit down and they crank it out. But look, many times it's just a matter of, I was doing this and this series of events happened and it came to me, and, I decided to, I added all these elements of things that were going on, like things like that. And that makes for a great story, I think.
Well, this even goes back, like, improv training has been so helpful in allowing me to go just from illustrating someone else's comic book stories to being able to write my own comic book stories. And having 4 years of stage experience performing in front of, crowds every weekend, but also doing like weird corporate parties and weddings and stuff like that, where you take suggestions from anyone and you have to make something up on the fly that's either, touching, weird, cute. It has to engage someone in some way. So I do tell my students this is how I first would start writing scary Godmother stories. Once I had the characters and I knew their personalities, I would put all their names in one bowl. Then in another bowl, I would put a bunch of verbs. And then another bowl, I would put a bunch of activities or places. And then I would pick one from each one. And it was like taking suggestions from the audience. So then you didn't have that big, blank, terrifying piece of paper in front of you that screamed, come up with an amazing thing right now, dummy, and we're like, I don't know what to put on you. And instead I would know, Harry, tea party, fishing or whatever, and then making a simple sentence, you get to build a story on that premise. So, and it takes all the nervousness out of it, or the stress out of it.
Very, very cool. So before we go, where can fans follow you on social media, and perhaps look out for anything you have coming up next?
The best place to follow me on social media and see the things that I'm doing, some which are scary Godmother based, sometimes Sandman based. You'll see a lot of Oberon on my social media, but I'm at the Jill Thompson, so just my regular name but with THE in front of it, on Instagram. Also, that's the same on TikTok, and a lot of the content is similar. My Instagram's been around a lot longer, so you can go back years and see all sorts of stuff that I've done. But TikTok, I just started, and mostly it was some process videos, painting. But lately, I've been making stop motion videos with scary Godmother dolls and
that's really cool.
And Bugaboo dolls. I made one last night and put it up this morning because it's my birthday this week, and also, so therefore it's scary Godmother's birthday coming up. But you might have a birthday where you would need to give a gift of either a scary Godmother doll or a Bugaboo backpack. And then I tell you where to get that.
Happy birthday.
Yes.
Fellow November person.
Scorpio.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Mike. No.
I don't have a November birthday. I'm
He's got
not
no
wrestling. What am I doing here?
Sorry, Mike.
Well, no, let's not go yet, because I feel like Mike needs to ask more questions.
I mean, I could.
I don't have any.
Well, let me go back to my question list. I will ask one more question, but then I do actually have to go myself, which is terrible.
He's like, I gotta get out of here.
I gotta get out of here. I would love to know, since you have, worked in many different medium and as well as on many different characters and books, if there is a property / character / book that you've loved in the past, you've not had the opportunity to work on yet, but you would jump at in a heartbeat if offered.
X-Men.
Nice. Any particular
Current X-Men or
version?
Oh man, I don't even know
within
who's
the
the
X-Men?
X-Men anymore. I'm old now because my X-Men are still, Byrne Claremont X-Men.
okay.
And as far as like, that's what I think of when I think of X-Men. There's so many new mutants that have happened since then. I I would jump in on any of them. I feel like, I got to touch on the characters that I've loved in the past, for a couple of, I think, Marvel Origins or something like that. I got to do the Phoenix origin page, and I've got like the old, Kirby, then Byrne influence one, and I got to do the Kitty Pryde one. So my Kitty Pryde has curly hair, for Christ's sake, because she's from the John Byrne Kitty Pryde. And I know it's like all the characters I draw have curly hair, and it's a pain. Wonder Woman and Wonder Woman the True Amazon, people are like, oh, I really love that you changed her clothes in every scene and gave her a different hairdo. I was like, well, one, she would, because she's royal, and two, I jumped on the George Perez giant curly haired Wonder Woman and never let go. But boy, that is a pain to render over and over. I know why she has straight long hair, because it's so much of a pain to do all of those curls and make sure that they look right. I loved that I was able to go back to that character and say something about her. But as far as superheroes go, X-Men, and then Neil Gaiman has been promising me a Delirium miniseries since my Brief Lives run was over, and I keep trying to force him to write one for me. So I would love to do that. I would jump on that. But I think he's
I'm gonna say we'll tell him.
Yeah.
Our backdoor channels to
right.
There's so many characters I would love to do. I mean, I am working on more Scary Godmother right now. I do a bunch of covers is what I'm mostly doing at the moment, because I really love, the more I develop my elaborate still on paper watercolor style, the longer and longer it takes me. So I couldn't keep up on a monthly book. So what I very much like doing when I am collaborating with someone else or working on established characters is being given the reins to go off and do something that's self-contained, and not have to worry about continuity. And I can go off and make a thing and then come back and present you with this. Here, this is a complete in itself story that you don't have to wait month to month for.
Well, that's amazing. I can't wait till the next.
Is there anything you would like to see me do that I have never worked on?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think of, I would love to see you work on anything. But what would be the right, it's funny you mention Shadowcat or Kitty Pryde, because I don't, my mind went right to her as like a character that I'd love to see you do. And I know you did some, but I kind of wonder if there's something there. I would love to see you do more Delirium. And what else would jump out at me? You said Spider-Man took your, was one of the first things that jumped out at you.
One of the best things I think I've ever done is a story with Mark Andreyko called The Date. And it was in a tiny little thing called Marvel Shadows and Light. And it was black and white, Marvel story comics. And it's been reprinted back and forth, but it's a Spider-Man story. And I grew up watching the Spider-Man cartoon, from the 60s with the best jazz score ever. And so my favorite villains were Electro, but the Rhino. And my brother and I would, we would, those socks that they look like tatami. They only have two toes and two toes.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Like ninjas wear, or even the ones like that have all the toes in them. We would get those. And the way our apartment that we grew up in was set up where it's got one long hallway and then rooms that are off of it, but then you go right into a big connected living room and dining room. So we would roll up our pants, put on those type of socks, and we would be like do one of these things, more gold bullion, and we would run from the one end of the apartment to the other and then slide all the way on the kitchen floor with our toe socks, and we would be Spider-Man and the Rhino. And so when Mark and Draco said, I'm getting to write a Spider-Man story, what do you want to draw? And I said, it's got to have like Electro or the Rhino or somebody in it, and I want to do it old-timey, like from when, like, Steve Ditko era. So it looks, everybody looks like they're from 1968 in it. And the hook in the story is Spidey leaves, he's at school, he passes up on an actual date with oh shoot, I can't think of the girl's name, Flash Thompson's girlfriend from like the 1968 Spider-Man comic.
Liz Bryant?
Liz, yes. No. That was
Betty Brant.
Betty Brant?
Something Brant.
Okay, anyway, boy, now I feel stupid because I don't know that. It's like Betty Brant worked at the Daily Bugle,
right?
But so he actually passes up a chance to go hang out with the kids, and he has a date, and Flash Thompson's like, "You have a date?" And you see him swing off away from the high school, and he's going back into the city, and there he encounters the Rhino, who's gonna rob a bank, or he's robbed a bank, so he's got to catch some burglars and do some stuff like that, but he can't be late for his date. And the only problem is like the letterer put the word balloons on the wrong part of the page and gives away the touching ending, because he's going to meet Aunt May at the cemetery, because it's the anniversary of Uncle Ben's death, and they go to the cemetery together. And that wasn't supposed to be, until you turn the page, you found out where they were going. And the lettering was on the wrong part. Like, oh no. But it was one of my favorite things I've ever drawn. And that had Spider-Man in it. But of course, obviously, again, not a Spider-Man that's in continuity in any way. It's the old Aunt May, not hot Aunt May. It's not Marissa Tomei Aunt May. It's
old Aunt May can be hot.
White-haired.
I mean, old Aunt May can be hot Aunt May, not hot Tomei.
Hot Tomei.
I'm getting delirious.
Felicia
Delirium
Hardy
is visiting me.
Yeah.
Felicia Hardy and Betty Brant were two people that Flash Thompson dated.
Maybe it was Betty. I think it was Betty, but she's got she actually has like a Betty or a Veronica style hairdo. I mean, there was a lot of Archie influence in this very story that I did. But real simple. It was pen and ink, so not something that I do very often anymore. But that was fun.
And welcome back. So, what'd you guys think of that interview? Look, I know it was a little wrestling heavy, but I think we can all appreciate that. I know Oren and I can. She has a really cool interview. Really great career. She's done a smattering of a lot of different things, which I always appreciate. There's more to a career than just, say, being an artist or being a writer. I always find it interesting when people pivot during their personal and professional careers, and she's certainly done so.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. You guys did a great job, and I would love to have Jill back. But she worked for Marvel, she worked for Dark Horse, DC, doing her own thing now. This is somebody who is a heavyweight in the wrestling world, in the comic book world, and is continuing to put out quality work, and I think that's fantastic.
And yes, in my heart, she is a heavyweight in the design area. Because look, I got to say, as you said, Oren, one of my favorite people. She is current with wrestling. She watches AEW. She's current with Impact, Ring of Honor, and WWE, of course. Friends with a lot of those guys, even the Second City Saint himself, CM Punk. So, very cool to chat with. So, look, guys, we hope you enjoyed this interview as much as we did recording it. As always, rate, review, subscribe, leave a comment. We'll share it with you. If you haven't seen our post, we'll read it on the air. So look, We'll see you next time.